guys, I hope you're doing great today, and I would like to welcome you on my free Kubernetes course for beginners. Guys, you must be thinking that if I want to learn about Kubernetes, I want to practically perform Kubernetes cluster commands, and I want to see how Kubernetes works. Do I have to have master node and couple of worker nodes and that kind of infrastructure? The answer is no. You can have even your local virtual machine to have a Kubernetes cluster which is fully functional. You can run all the Kubernetes commands, kube control commands on that Kubernetes cluster, and it is known as Minikube. The small Kubernetes cluster that can be installed on your virtual machine. If you have a virtual machine, you can install Minikube, and honestly guys, it is pretty simple and straightforward. Just like you install Docker, there are a couple of commands that we have to execute, and you can see I have this GitHub repository with Kubernetes, and I would be uploading every command, every tutorial regarding Kubernetes that we cover practically on my YouTube session, and you will have this tutorial on GitHub. I will definitely share the repository link in the description, so make sure that you check out the description of each video, because I used to share the links, the important links to the repositories or my Google Slides in the description of each video. So before we start installing Minikube, make sure that you subscribe DevOps Molvi. Let's get started and see how we can have a fully functional mini Kubernetes cluster, which is known as Minikube, on our virtual machine. And by the way guys, if you want to know about Minikube, I have also explained what is Minikube here in simple words. Minikube is a tool that allows you to run Kubernetes clusters locally. So if you have a virtual machine on your VMware or VirtualBox or Hyper-V, so you can have Minikube installed on that VM, and you can learn all kube control commands that actually are used in production environments as well. So we are going to learn Kubernetes kube control commands in our next lecture, but you can execute all those commands if you have a Minikube cluster on your local machine. That's how simple it is. So you don't have to worry about I should have a master node, I should have at least 2 worker nodes. No, you can have Minikube on your virtual machine and you can learn almost everything about a Kubernetes cluster. But there is one thing that you must know. In Minikube, when we install Minikube on a virtual machine, that virtual machine becomes the master node as well as the worker node. So you must know that a Minikube is installed on a virtual machine. Now, which one is my master node and which one is my worker node? So surprisingly, that virtual machine where our Minikube is installed is also treated as a master node or the control plane. We have all the components of a master node, and we can deploy our workloads, pods, deployment services like we do on worker nodes. So that virtual machine is treated both as the control plane as well as the worker node. So you may be asked about this Minikube, that what is Minikube and is it master node only, or it behaves or it works as a worker node as well? So the answer is it is control plane or the master node. At the same time, it acts as the worker node. So that's what you must know about Minikube. We can install Minikube on our local virtual machine, or if you have a virtual machine on AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud Platform. And before proceeding, we used to make sure that Docker is installed on the virtual machine. You can watch the following tutorial how to install Docker. So guys, I have already shared this tutorial on my channel to install Docker on Ubuntu. So I have also shared the link. You can, if you want, if you know how to install it, then you can skip it. But if you want to know how we can install Docker on Ubuntu, I have also shared the URL. And by the way, we are going to install Docker, and I have this on my GitHub repository, a small short guide how we can install Docker. So without any further ado, let's start. I have this virtual machine on my AWS platform. Okay, on my AWS, I have created a Minikube virtual machine, and I will install the Minikube on this brand new virtual machine. It does not have anything priorly installed on it, and I will run. This is my first command. I will install. And by the way, guys, I'm working as root. So if you are not working as root, you have to use sudo. So after that, I will download the tools and dependencies for Docker. And now, yes, why do we need Docker in Kubernetes? You know that Docker is used as the container runtime interface. Okay, to run our containerized application, we can use Docker, we can use Containerd, we can use Podman. So I have chosen Docker because it is more simple with Minikube. So after that, I have to add the Docker's GPG key, and it should not take much time. And I will add the official Docker repository so that we have the latest version of Docker on our Ubuntu. By the way, guys, another thing, that my virtual machine is Ubuntu 24.04. So it works on both, and this tutorial is related to 22.04, but it works on 24.04 as well. And after that, I will update my repositories, and I will install Docker. CE means Community Edition, and it should not take that much time. And after that, once our Docker is installed, we will proceed to install Minikube. And now there are actually only 3 commands that are used to install Minikube. Now you can see we need to install Minikube, so we need to run the following command. The first command will download the release of Minikube. So it will get, we are using curl to get the release of Minikube, and after that we will install it on Ubuntu with these commands, and our Minikube version would be able to tell us that Minikube has been installed with that version. So after that, I will copy this first command. I hope that Docker has been installed. Now I can run all Docker commands. Docker is installed. Now guys, I will install Minikube. So make sure that you follow this guide that I will share in the description to install Minikube. This is the first command to get the release of Minikube so that we can install it. And okay, it has been downloaded. Now I will install with sudo, or you can use without sudo if you are on root. So this command would be going to install Minikube for us, and it is installed. After that, I can run Minikube version, and you would be able to see that Minikube has been installed. Okay, and this is the version of our Minikube Kubernetes cluster. That's how simple it is. So there are no rocket sciences here, and you can simply straightforwardly run these commands on your Ubuntu machine, and Minikube would be installed. Now I have to start Minikube with the Docker driver, because Docker would be used as the container runtime. The containers will run inside with the help of Docker, right? So we have to, this is just like we are going to integrate Minikube with Docker, and I will run this command. So Docker would be our driver for our Kubernetes cluster, and you might face this error. uh, the Docker driver should not be used with the root privileges. If you wish to continue as root, use the hyphen hyphen or dash dash force. So I will use this same command, or I will copy this command. So we are going to forcefully use the Docker driver with our Minikube. I will rerun this command using force. So I'm forcing Minikube to use this driver, to use Docker driver, whether I am as root or any other user. Now it will take a couple of moments and our Minikube cluster would be ready. So now you can see that downloading Kubernetes version. So this Kubernetes cluster version would be downloaded, and it will take a couple of moments to install. And if you are running Minikube within a VM, consider using driver is equal to none, but we are going to use driver as Docker, and also using the Docker driver based on our configuration. So we are going to use the Docker driver, and because it is recommended, and creating Docker container. So these containers will have our all Kubernetes masternode core components. Now you are going to see it when I will run kubectl commands. You will see how we can have all the components of the masternode on this virtual machine. Okay, and now you can see that this is our Docker version, and we have this Kubernetes version, generating certificates and keys, and configuring rollback access control rules. And our Kubernetes cluster has been installed. Kubectl is now configured to use Minikube. But to run all these commands, now we have to install kubectl, because you can see that kubectl not found. It is showing that kubectl is not here, because kubectl commands are used to interact with a Kubernetes cluster. We are going to learn a lot about kubectl. It is also known as kubectl. So kubectl must be there, must be installed, and with the help of kubectl, we are going to get about our cluster deployment, services, pods, replica sets, ingress, everything. After that, guys, I can check the Minikube status, since Minikube is installed, and I can see that Minikube has the control plane as type, and it is running host, kubelet, API server, kube config, everything is running. So this status, it means that our Kubernetes cluster is ready, Minikube is ready. Now we have to install kubectl. The kubectl is a Kubernetes CLI, okay? Just like we have G Cloud, we have AWS CLI, we have Azure CLI. So we have Kubernetes CLI, and it is known as kubectl, and it is used to interact with Kubernetes clusters. We will use it to work with our Minikube cluster. The installation of kubectl is also simple, and we need to execute the following commands. And I have shared all these commands. So I will run this, and we will have kubectl on our virtual machine. So maybe, so I will add the GPG key, and after that I will get the release of kubectl from Kubernetes official repository, and after it I will just run this command, and we will have kubectl on our virtual machine. Now you can see it is downloading, and okay, kubectl is installed, and this is the version, and I can confirm the client version of kubectl. Okay, and okay, it has been installed. This is the client version, this is the customized version. So I should be able to install, now I should be able to run each and every kubectl command. So kubectl, which is a Kubernetes CLI, has been installed, and you can see kubectl kubectl controls the Kubernetes cluster manager, and you can have everything, you can have the idea of all these kubectl basic commands here, like what is the purpose of kubectl create. Kubectl create creates a resource from a file that would be a YAML file. Similarly, expose, run, and set. So I have shared a couple of kubectl commands. By the way, in our next lecture, I have already prepared 50 kubectl commands that we must know as a DevOps engineer. All these are basic and fantastic commands, and literally so simple that we can learn them in a single day. So I'm sharing a couple of these kubectl commands here in this repository as well, like kubectl cluster info. I want to see the details and overview of the cluster. It will share the cluster information, kubectl cluster info. Now you can see we have kubectl Kubernetes control plane is running on this URL, and we have core DNS, which is just like Kubernetes own DNS server. So it is running on this URL. So it means that our Kubernetes cluster is running fine. And similarly, we have this kubectl config view. I will run it, and it will share more details about our cluster. This is cluster Minikube extensions and the provider, and also the namespace, which is default, and we have the kind as config. So that's how we can run kubectl commands. And for instance, if I want to see the nodes, it will show us only one node because we have this as the master node, and you can see that this is our node, which is control plane. So this virtual machine is acting as the control plane or the master node. So that's how we can run kubectl get nodes, and similarly we can have kubectl get pods, and there are no resources found in default namespace. But if I run kubectl get pods minus minus or hyphen hyphen all namespaces, then it will show us all these parts of this Minikube cluster, and most of these parts belong to the control plane components like etcd, kube API server, kube controller manager, kube scheduler, and these parts are running on this. So these are actually the core components of a master node. So all these components are running as pods on this virtual machine, and it has created a Minikube cluster. I hope that you understand how Minikube works at the backend. It has actually pods, and in those pods our control plane components run. Now if I want to see the namespaces, so I can have kubectl get namespaces, and it will share all the namespaces of the Minikube cluster, which is we have this default. We can create our own namespaces as well. So these are actually the namespaces of the Minikube cluster. So guys, this is actually a fully functional Kubernetes cluster. We will have the same when we have the master node and a couple of worker nodes. That's how the same thing we can replicate using our Minikube cluster. And now, for instance, if I want to deploy a local application, and for instance, I want to deploy NGINX server locally on my Minikube Kubernetes cluster, I will have to create a deployment first, and then after that, I will create a service and expose it. So in order to create a deployment, I have shared this command. Now you can see kubectl create deployment, the name of the deployment, and that image. So this image is actually the Docker image, and I will use the default namespace. I'm not changing the namespace. We can do it and we can have our own namespace, but now for this lecture I'm using the default namespace, and it will create the deployment in the default namespace. Now you can see the deployment has been created, I can run kubectl get deployment. Okay, and it is ready and up to date and available. So after that, I will expose this deployment using the kubectl expose command. This is how we can create a service. And now guys, you can see I am going to expose my application, my web server, to the external users. So I have to create a service. A service exposes our application for the external users, and there are actually 4 types. You can see the type is equal to load balancer. I will definitely have a full lecture on it because we have to discuss all the types of services in Kubernetes, like load balancer, node port, external name, cluster IP. So these are actually the 4 types of services in Kubernetes. So a service is used to expose our application for the external users or for the external applications. I will use this command, and I will use this port 80 and type is equal to load balancer to create a load balancer service. And now you can see that the service has been exposed. So I can run kubectl get services, and it will show us that I have actually 2 services. Just like I told you, cluster IP, the internal IP address of the Kubernetes cluster, and we have this load balancer service DevOps web, which I have used to expose our NGINX deployment. Now I can check Minikube IP, and this is actually the IP address, and I can run curl http this IP address and the port. I will use this port, and it will show us that our NGINX is running locally on that port. So that is how we can expose our application. So let me repeat it again. I will run Minikube IP, and this is my internal IP address of the Kubernetes cluster, and I will get kubectl get services, and this is actually the port where our NGINX is running. So I can use curl command to see if because since it is locally and I'm running my web server locally, it is not for external users at the moment. It is not externally exposed. I have to use node port to expose it externally, and I will run http and the cluster IP address and the port where our NGINX server is running, and you can see NGINX web server is running. So guys, I hope that you don't have a fear that Kubernetes is really tough. No, you can, or I can, learn Kubernetes real quick with the help of Minikube. And in the next chapter, we are going to learn top 50 kubectl commands, like kubectl get config maps, services, deployments, pods, namespaces. And if I have mastered all these kubectl command, it would definitely be no issue for me to manage or to work with a production Kubernetes cluster. So I would say that Minikube is a fantastic Kubernetes cluster, and I would say that it is the quickest and the most easiest way to learn Kubernetes. So if I repeat it quickly, we need to have Docker installed on our virtual machine, and using Ubuntu, I can run 3 or 4 commands, and you saw that Minikube has been installed using those commands that I have already shared on my Kubernetes repository. And you can go through this guide and you can have Minikube installed on your virtual machine. I hope that this video was really simple and it was quick for you. In the next video, we are going to learn 50 kubectl commands. So stay tuned. We are going to learn each and everything about Kubernetes in this series. Have a good one, and bye.